Alright everyone, in this video I am going to show you all how to convert a Vue app, which is using a Pojo store, to use a Vuex store. And I have never done this before, so you're going to struggle along with me. These are going to be the steps that we're going to take here. Install Vuex, set up Vue app to use Vuex, replace our Pojo store with the Vuex store, set up our Vuex initial state, replace component methods with Vuex component actions, replace event listeners with Vuex store mutations, replace simple component data with Vuex getters, and finally profit. We're going to be using my personal blog for this demo. My blog is written in Vue and uses Hexo, which is a static site generator. And I'm using Vue just to handle a few things. For example, the showing and hiding of this menu is using a Vue component. And what else? On the page briangonzalez.org/github, I use Vue to make a request to GitHub, grab all of my repos, and display any repo that has, I think, over 50 stars or something like that. So not too complex of an app, but a good learning lesson nonetheless. So, all right, let's just get started. So I'm going to go into my repository where I have my blog stored. Just going to open it up in my text editor. And let's take a look at our main app.js file, and that's inside of my themes, briangonzalez.org, source, JS, and then I have my app.js file. Okay. Just going to delete some code I have laying around that I don't need anymore. Okay, so let's take a look at how I have this Vue app.js file set up. Import Vue, set up the Vue router, and this is where we're really going to spend a lot of our time inside of this store file, which you can see right here on the same level as my app.js file, this store file here, and we'll get into this later. But that's where we set up the store and set up a few components. And yeah, and here's our root component, or it's our main application. And then we have our router, and then a few other a few router modifications to handle really smooth page-to-page transitions that use the Vue router. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with the installation. I think we said for item 0 we're just going to install Vuex. All right, npm install -- save Vuex, and that's going to make Vuex a dependency of our application. And if all goes as planned, I should see Vuex as a dependency of my application now. Okay, there we go. There it is. Line 38 there. And I wanted to also mention that I'm going to be following along the Vuex documentation. I'm going to be utilizing this documentation heavily as we go through this tutorial. Okay, so let's now take a look at our second item. Actually, let's go ahead and grab our Unicode character so we can check off stuff as we go. All right, let's now set up Vue app to use Vuex. All right, so we're going to pop over to the documentation, and we're just going to go into this tutorial section here, which is item 3 here. And here they have a pretty cut and dry step-by-step tutorial on how to set up Vuex in an application. So we'll take liberally from this section here. All right, so it says, create a new file in vuex/store.js. I want to just repurpose the store file that I have already. So I'm just going to rename this one here to store.pojo.js. And then I'll create a new one called store.js. And this is where we are going to sort of put all of our new Vuex-based store. All right, so let's go ahead and grab some of this boilerplate over here. Okay, go ahead and grab the rest of this as well. So we can see that we few things here. We import Vue, so we have Vue available. We import Vuex, so we have Vuex available. And then we make Vue aware of Vuex. And what that does is just configure all of our components to have a little bit of Vuex sugar on top of them. We set up our initial state. We set up some mutations. And then we export the store. Okay, pretty simple. All right, so now we need to pop back over to our main app file here. Okay, so let's go over to there. And we need to now import the store, which we're already doing. And let's see. Looks like we need to configure the store here. So let's do that. And since I'm using ES6, I could write this as store:store, but I will use store:store, but I will use the ES6 shorthand notation, which allows me to write it just like that. Okay, so what this says in the documentation here, make this and all child components aware of the new store. So that's what we get when we do that. All right. So now I want to go look at what the old Pojo store used to do. So let's start with the default state that this Pojo store had set up. All right. Well, actually, let's walk through what this store does. It was a store that was, created based off of what's called the EventEmitter, which is a JavaScript class which gives you the ability to subscribe and publish events using the on notation here. So this is a subscription to the toggle menu event. This is the subscription to the hide menu event. And what this old Pojo store that I currently have running on my website, what this Pojo store does is listen for event dispatches from child components and modifies the state based on the dispatch of a given event. Okay, and this store also binds to the document key down and closes the menu. So for example, if I have the menu shown and I hit escape, the menu goes away. That's what this little bit of code here does. And then the last thing that the Pojo store does is fetch, as I stated earlier, fetches the the top GitHub repos. Any repo that has more than 90 stargazers, we grab that and then we set it to the store. Okay, so let's start with the menu. Actually, let's start with let's see where we are now. Set up Vue app to use Vuex. Okay, we've already done that, so let's go ahead and mark that off. Okay, replace our Pojo store with the Vuex store. Have we done that already? Okay, yeah, well, it looks like we have already, so we're gonna check that one off as well. All right, so let's go ahead and set up our Vuex initial state. All right, so I think we can just take the state that we had from before and use that as a starting point. All right, store.state. All right, so let's go ahead and cool. So now we are in parity with what we had before in our Pojo store. So good there. Replace component methods with Vuex component actions. All right, so let's go ahead and look at. Let's go ahead and pop back over to the Vuex documentation tutorial, and we'll go to the tutorial, and we'll go down to step 2 in the tutorial where it talks about setting up your actions. Okay, so let's go ahead and go into the component that actually triggers this toggle menu and hide menu events that we use in our Pojo store, and I believe it's this component here. All right, so we have a click event which calls close menu. And close menu emits the toggle menu event, and our Pojo store handled the toggle menu and just set the menu shown variable or property to the opposite of what it currently is. Pretty simple. All right, so let's see how we can refactor that to use an action. Okay. So this is the boilerplate here that you need to create what's called a Vuex action. Vuex actions always require their first argument to be the store. So that's what you see here. And I believe that is outlined. Let's see. Well, that's outlined somewhere here in the documentation, but we'll just ignore that for now. So this is an action. We are past the store, and we are deconstructing the store. We're getting a dispatch event or dispatch property and a state property. Okay, and we're going to dispatch. So we want to dispatch. We want to dispatch an action called toggle_menu, and it's sort of conventional to write your actions in this sort of uppercase here. And I don't need to pass it any data, so it's just dispatching toggle menu. So then I'll pop back over to the store, and let's go ahead and actually define that action. All right. So we define these actions. Actually, let's increment by. Okay. Actually, the first thing I need to do is wire up the action in my component. Okay. All right, I'm just following along with the syntax over here. I created my component, and I'm going to define the actions underneath this Vuex key. So I have that here, Vuex actions, and in my component, you can see that I call it close menu. So I will call it close menu. And whenever I close menu, I will toggle the menu. Okay. So now we need to create what's called a, so this is our first action. Now we need to create what's called a mutation. So we're not fully done here, but we've just done one. So let's go ahead and check that off. All right. Replace event listeners with Vuex store mutations. Okay, so these are the event listeners here. We no longer want to use that paradigm, so we need to create what are called mutations. So let's take a look at mutations here. So let's go back over to the documentation, and we see that we want to create what are called mutations. We see how to define them here. So we are now back in our store.js file. This is our Vuex store. And we called this action toggle menu. So over here, we will define this mutation toggle menu. Actually, hold on one sec. It's a function, and we are past the state. And now we need to mutate that state. So let's see what our Pojo store used to do to that state when it got the toggle menu event emitted to it. It would set state.menu shown to the opposite. Okay, so cool. Pretty simple. It's just going to be something like this. All right, so I think it's a good idea at this point to go ahead and spin up our Vue application and just sort of see where we are, maybe debug any errors that might be thrown in the console, or just poke around a little bit and see what's going on. So I'm going to spin up my blog locally. Like I said earlier, I'm using a static site generator called Hexo, and I have it configured to build my Vue application when I make modifications. All right, localhost 8080. Oh, that's not what I want. Localhost 4000 actually. Okay, so it's complaining about an emit function, emit not being a function. And that's because I think some parts of my code are still set up to use the Pojo store. So let me see if I can just fix that really quickly. All right, so we have a hide menu. All right, let's see if we can, I think that's this one right here. All right, let's go ahead and okay, so it looks like I'm error free at this point. And we're just going to do a real quick check to see if our new toggle menu action is actually getting called. So I'm just going to throw in a little debugger here. Not debugger, a little console.log that just says action called. Toggle menu. All right, so let's go ahead and see what this, oh, okay, great. So it looks like we are actually binding the click to that action, and it is getting called, but you can see that the menu doesn't actually show. So let's go ahead and dig into why that is. All right, so I think the reason we are not seeing the menu actually showing is because our templates are set to use what's called the data property on a component and not the Vuex getters. So we need to configure this menu component to use Vuex getter. So let's go ahead and see how that works. All right, so I'm going to pop back over to my component. Let's go ahead and define some getters. And I believe we called this property state.menu_shown. All right, so let's just call it menu shown. And here we are going to create a function called menu shown. And it looks like we're past the state. And let's just return state.menu shown. All right. So I think it will be more clear to future version of myself if I set the default for this variable to be false. All right. So let's head back over to here. There we go. We can see that we are now modifying the state, and our template is bound, and everything updates. So it's pretty cool. So with just a little bit of code, we got a lot of magic. And this will allow us to actually remove this data here, this data property as well as this methods property. And I never needed that in the first place, so I'll get rid of that as well, that components property. Okay, looks like I have an issue there as well. On line 7, I actually was using the old Pojo store again. All right, now we're good. So now let's look at the hide menu. Let's see where we were using hide menu. So I'm going to search my code base for hide menu. Looks like I was using it in my router, and it looks like I was also using it in, oh, just my router actually. All right, let's see. Actually, I'm going to punt on that one for now, so let's go ahead and leave that one alone. Let's look at now tackling this document.addEventListener. All right. So if I were to just naively throw this in here and try to modify the state directly, I don't think this is going to work. Okay, mutations.toggle menu. All right, so it looks like that may have worked. Okay, I'm going to leave that alone. We'll come back to it if it bites us in the butt a little bit later. We will come back to it. But it looks like this code, as it stands, worked just fine. So that's awesome. All right, so now let's go look at what's called the menu link, which is, oh, okay, I see what's going on. We were actually clicking this little X here before, not the menu link. The X is always there, I believe, but just set to set to be opaque. There it is. All right, so let's assume that our menu component here, which we were just modifying, is the entire menu. But we have what's called a menu link component, which is this one right here, which I thought I was modifying before, but it turns out I wasn't modifying that one, and that one needs to be fixed. So let's look at what it would take to fix menu link. All right, so I don't need to import the store anymore, so I'm gonna delete that line of code. And I know I don't need the data and the methods properties anymore, and I actually don't need the components one either. So I'm just going to end up starting from scratch. So let's go ahead and delete the stuff we don't need. we'll go ahead and grab the boilerplate that we have from the menu link or the menu component. All right, so we have our getter, which it doesn't look like any place in this template we are actually using the data. So we don't need the getters. So that goes away. But we do use this. We do use an action called show menu. All right, so I'm going to use show menu. And it looks like I want to call toggle menu again. And I have a toggle menu action from the menu component, so I'll just use it over here as well. Oops. Okay. Let's take a look. All right, perfect. So let's go ahead and make these logs a little more descriptive. So this will be action called from menu component, and over here, this is in the menu link component, and over here in the menu component we'll say action called from the menu component, so we can kind of see which action's being called and when. All right, so there was the action called from the menu component, and let's try to trigger one from the menu link component. There we go, action called from the menu link component. Cool, so now that's all wired up and working well. So I'm gonna go back over to the sort of to-do list, and all right. So I have a little bit more to do. I want to go ahead and fix up the GitHub page now. All right, so now we're seeing that we do have some errors in the console, and that's because we have ripped out our Pojo store, and this page, our GitHub page, is still relying on the Pojo store. So let's see if we can use what we learned while refactoring our menu link and our menu components. Let's see what we can take from those learnings and apply them to this new exercise of fetching the GitHub top repos. All right, so I have a GitHub repos component, which it looks like it's in charge of. All right, let's see how this works. Looks like I iterate over all the repos in the store, the top repos. Created 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for each. All right, I'm going to delete some boilerplate and just clean this file up a little bit. All right, so it looks like we are using the created hook, lifecycle hook of this Vue component to fetch the top GitHub repos. And I believe this API call uses pagination, and so I think that's what I'm doing here with this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think I'm grabbing the top 5 pages of. I think I'm grabbing the top 5 pages of the API of the GitHub API for my top repos. But let me take a look. Let's go ahead and pop over to our old Pojo store. Fetch top GitHub repos, takes the page and uses what's called fetch Yeah, okay. That's exactly what it does. It uses pagination, grabs the page by index. I think the repo returns like, or I think the API returns like 20 repos by default. So this is allowing me to grab all of the repos that I have. Okay, so let's see what it would take to move this into actions and getters and mutations. I'm going to just go ahead and grab the guts of this. I'm going to go ahead and grab the guts of this file, or of this method here, and move it over to our Vuex store. And I think this is a mutation. So we'll call this fetch top GitHub repos. And it is going to take state. And this method is reliant upon the fetch module, so I need to go ahead and bring that over. Okay. So let's see what it would look like to fire an event that goes ahead and fetches our top GitHub repos within this component. So we'll go ahead and delete that store declaration there. And similar to our menu component, we'll need to define an action at the top of this file here. And we'll call it fetch top GitHub repos. Action called from, this is the GitHub repos component, and it is the fetch top GitHub repos. Action. Okay. So we will do created. All right, so I'm not quite sure how to trigger an action from within a lifecycle hook. So let's go ahead and, I guess we're gonna have to Google around for that. All right, so I just had a little bit of a breakthrough. A small little syntax nuance was really biting me in the butt here. That little guy right there, the arrow function. So if you know anything about the arrow syntax, it basically is a way of defining a function that doesn't switch your context to the object that the function is declared on. It keeps the outer context, and in this case is the window. And so when I was calling this.fetch top GitHub repos, that was in essence the same as calling window.fetch top GitHub repos, and that doesn't work. So what's the fix? Fix is simply to write it this way. And now we'll see that when I go down and I navigate to my GitHub page, that I will in fact call that action. So let's go ahead and see that in action. All right, there it is. But now I have a new bug. So let's go ahead and track that one down. Page is not defined. So I believe that is inside of the store. All right, so it is complaining that it does not have page right there. That's the one it's complaining about. So let me throw a debugger here, and I want to inspect what the arguments are passed to this mutation are. Actually, I think I want to define my page as the second argument of my action, and then send it right along to the mutation. Let's go ahead and take a look. All right, this is looking really promising. The page turned black, so that means we're getting somewhere. I've gone ahead and I seem to have hit my debugger, which is good. All right, okay, same error. I'm going to try that one more time and then inspect what my arguments are at this point. So I have the state of the world, and then I'm also passed the argument, and you can see that I'm not doing anything with that argument. So that's likely my issue, and I just need to define it. And I think that's going to fix all of my problems. Okay, so now I have some new problems. This mutation is relying upon the Pojo store to set the new values, basically the data that is returned from the GitHub API. So we need to find everywhere that we are using store and replace it with state. Just state. Okay, I think that is exactly what we want. Let's go ahead and save that and give it a try. Okay, now we are no longer well, the console is no longer complaining about errors inside of our mutation here, but now it's complaining about an error inside of our component. So let's go ahead and look at what we've messed up inside of the component. All right. So I think the problem here is that we've defined our actions, but we have not defined our getters. So let's go ahead and define our getters. And we'll pop back over to our menu component to just refresh ourselves on the syntax. So I want a getter called top repos. Top repos, and that's going to be a function. Remember that I'm past the state, and I want to grab the top repos off the state. State.github.top repos. And you can see that we are now being returned our top repos. Okay, so I think the last thing that we are going to want to do is just do a little bit of cleanup. I'm going to delete all of these console.logs that I've placed around my code for debugging purposes. Looks like I've already cleaned it up there. Okay, and last but not least, let's go ahead and delete our Pojo store. We don't need it anymore. Move to trash. Okay, so the last little bit that I wanted to show everyone is the diff. What does it look like to go from a Pojo store to a Vuex store? We've modified our package.json. We've modified our main app.js file. We've modified all of our components, and we have a brand new store. And let's go ahead and look through the diff. All right, so we've added in Vuex to our package.json. We have added the store to our top level app component. We have changed all of our references to the Pojo state within our components to use what are called Vuex getters. You can see, for example, the top repos here and here. We have defined some actions, more getters, more actions. And then we get into our store, which actually does not look, for this simple trivial application, this store does not look that much different than a Pojo store. But we are set up to use Vuex from this point forward, which is a nice starting place. Okay, hope you enjoyed this video.